storm had torn through the Cathera forest with a fury that even the planet's native apex predators avoided. Rain hammered the canopy like artillery fire, and lightning split the sky in jagged white scars. Somewhere in that chaos, Darren had lost his emergency beacon, his rations, and any sense of direction. What he hadn't lost were the two small, shivering creatures pressed against his chest. They were Vraken cubs, juveniles of the galaxy's most feared predator species. Adults stood 9 feet tall with obsidian claws and enough bite force to crush starship hull plating. These two, however, were barely the size of earth wolves, their silver fur matted with mud and blood. Darren had found them whimpering beneath a collapsed tree, their mother's broken body nearby, a victim of the storm's violence. He should have kept walking. His shuttle had crashed 3 kilometers back, and the distress signal would take hours to reach anyone. Survival protocol said to find shelter, conserve energy, and wait. It said nothing about adopting orphaned alien death machines. But Darren had never been good at following protocol. "Easy now," he murmured, feeling the smaller cub's rapid heartbeat against his ribs. Its sibling, the one with the notched ear that Darren had started calling Nara, watched him with eyes that gleamed like molten copper. There was intelligence there, sharp and assessing. "We're going to be okay." Thunder cracked overhead and both cubs flinched. Nara growled, a sound like grinding stone, but stayed close. Darren adjusted his torn jacket around them and pushed forward through the undergrowth. By nightfall, he'd found a rocky overhang that offered some protection from the elements. The storm still raged, but here the wind couldn't reach them. Darren's fingers were numb as he gathered wood. Miraculously, he found some dry kindling wedged in a stone crevice. His emergency fire starter was one of the few pieces of gear still functioning. The flame caught on the third try. Light bloomed in the darkness, and warmth followed. The cubs had been huddled in the shadows, but now they crept forward, drawn by instinct older than civilization. Nara approached first, sniffing the fire with cautious curiosity. The smaller cub followed, making a chittering sound that might have been relief. Darren slumped against the rock wall, exhaustion pulling at him. He'd lost blood from a gash on his arm, and his ribs screamed with every breath, but the cubs were warming up, their shivering subsiding. That was something. "Your mom was protecting you," he said quietly, more to fill the silence than anything else. "She was brave. You should remember that." Nara's ears swiveled toward him. The cub tilted its head, and for a moment Darren could have sworn it understood. He tore open his last protein bar, crushed but edible, and split it 3 ways. The cubs sniffed their portions suspiciously before devouring them. Nara finished first and shuffled closer, resting its head on Darren's leg. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that Darren felt something catch in his throat. "Yeah," he whispered, running a hand over the cub's damp fur. "We're a family now, aren't we?" The Vraken Sovereign Guard found them at dawn. Captain Vorth had led elite hunter teams through 3 star systems, tracking rogue warlords and insurgent cells. Nothing in his 30 years of service had prepared him for the scene before him. A human, sat beside a dying campfire. 2 Vraken cubs curled in his lap. One was asleep, its muzzle tucked under Darren's arm. The other, Nara, watched the approaching soldiers with wary eyes but made no move to flee. "Hold position," Vorth ordered his squad. They'd been tracking the cubs since yesterday, following the distress beacon from their mother's collar. Finding them alive was unexpected. Finding them with an alien was impossible. The human looked up, his face pale beneath smears of dirt and blood. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he placed a protective hand on each cub. "They're hurt," Darren said, his voice hoarse. "The smaller one has a cracked rib, I think. And they haven't eaten properly in days." Vorth's translator relayed the words, but their meaning felt inadequate. This was a human, a species the Vraken had encountered only twice before, both times in brief diplomatic exchanges. Humans were weak, fragile things from a distant arm of the galaxy. They had no claws, no armor, no place in the food chain, yet this one had kept 2 cubs alive through a storm that had killed their mother. "How did you—" Vorth began, then stopped. He didn't know what question to ask. Darren's hand moved gently over Nara's head and the cub leaned into the touch. They were alone. What was I supposed to do, leave them? It wasn't a question that required an answer. Vorth's second-in-command, Lieutenant Kess, stepped forward with a medical scanner. The readings confirmed what they could see. The human was hypothermic, injured, and operating on fumes. He should have been dead hours ago. We need to get you to the med bay, Kes said carefully. Them first, Darren insisted. They're just kids. Nara made a low rumbling sound and pressed closer to Darren. The message was clear. The cub wasn't going anywhere without him. Vorth had seen many things in his career. He'd seen warriors face death without flinching. He'd seen mothers fight impossible odds for their young. But he'd never seen an alien species so different, so seemingly unsuited for this world, show such instinctive compassion for creatures that could one day hunt them. We'll take all of you, Vorth said finally. He signaled his team to prepare the transport. As his soldiers moved to assist, he watched the human carefully lift the smaller cub, cradling it like something precious. Later, aboard the ship, Vorth would file his report. He would describe the crash site, the storm, the dead mother. He would note the human's injuries and his unlikely survival. But what he would remember, what he knew would spread through the sovereign fleets and beyond, was the image of that campfire, a human and two predator cubs huddled together against the darkness. Not as prey and predator, but as something else entirely, as family. In the medical bay, Nara refused to leave Darren's side while the doctors worked. The smaller cub slept in a recovery pod nearby, its vitals stabilizing. When Darren finally succumbed to exhaustion, Nara curled up at the foot of his bed, one paw resting against his leg. The guard watching the scene would later tell others what he'd witnessed. The story would spread, as all good stories do across worlds and species. And wherever it was told, the lesson remained the same. Humanity didn't survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because when faced with the impossible choice between self-preservation and compassion, they somehow found a way to choose both. And sometimes, that made all the difference.